Tonight, the start of a stunning 25 years behind bars for the king of crypto turned convict, sentenced for his multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme. What made a judge come down so hard on SBF in just a minute. Plus, in Baltimore, new details and an update you will watch live right here on what is now a mission to clear away twisted metal and debris from that deadly bridge collapse. We're live on the ground with what we're learning. Then, what the survivors of a deadly rampage are telling us about the terrifying moment a man came after them in an attack being compared to a scene from Grand Theft Auto. And TikTok going on offense with a multi-million-dollar ad buy. So is that going to be enough to slow down a bill to maybe ban TikTok here at home? Plus, the new warning from doctors about the disease known as Mpox making a dangerous comeback. That's later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we start with the massive blow for the mastermind of a multi-billion-dollar crypto fraud scheme. A stunning 25 years in prison for Sam Bankman-Fried and an $11 billion fine. The judge deciding the sentence, saying he'd never seen, in his words, a performance like SBF's trial testimony, saying that if Bankman-Fried wasn't outright lying, he was evasive. Now, SBF is trying to paint a really different picture of himself before the sentencing came down, telling the court that what he did haunts him every day, that it's been excruciating to watch the consequences of what he did unfold, that his customers don't deserve this level of pain, in his words. His attorney says they plan to appeal with his parents there for the sentencing. In a statement, you can see him here, the family wrote they're heartbroken. They will continue to fight for their son, they say. Remember, back in November, SBF was convicted of stealing FTX customers' money and lying to investors in a fraud scheme that ended up collapsing what was once one of the world's most popular crypto exchange platforms. It was a huge trial. We've covered a lot of it right here on this show. But the prosecutor behind this trial now saying tonight this sentence is a warning to others who might be tempted to do something like this. Kate Rooney is joining us now. And Kate, this is interesting for so many reasons and historic for one big one. This is the first big sentencing in this crypto era, if you will. Talk us through why the judge laid the hammer down like this.
Hey, Hallie. Yeah, well, one of the big reasons that this 25-year sentence came to fruition was the fact that Sam Bankman-Fried committed perjury, according to the judge. The judge determined that Bankman-Fried lied on the stand, and that was really the big gamble of him testifying in the first place during his criminal trial. We talked to legal experts at the time that said it's a huge risk. It could come back in sentencing. That was brought up a lot. The fact that he didn't seem to show remorse. He was really defiant. We heard a totally different tone today, by the way. He was much more contrite and apologizing when he was kind of making his last pitch to the judge before the sentencing. Another reason was that the judge determined that he probably would commit another crime if he got as short of a sentence as the defense was looking for, which was only 5 to 6 years. He said he has the ability to go out and do this again, is sort of how he put it. And then just really the line came back over and over again. The judge said, you know, in his 30 years, as you mentioned, he has not seen anything like this. Talked about his ability to kind of dodge questions on the stand. All of that culminated in this 25-year sentence, although it is much lower than what the prosecution of the government side was looking for, which is around 40 to 50 years. The max sentence was over a century, more than 100 years. So in that context, sort of middle of the ground here between those two sides.
So talk us through that context, right? Because I think people think about what is, like, how can we even think to compare this kind of a sentence, considering how what Sam Bankman-Fried did was in some ways unprecedented because it was crypto. In other ways, we've seen a similar movie play out a bit. I think people think about Bernie Madoff, right? That massive Ponzi scheme. And Madoff was sentenced to, I think, more than 100 years behind prison. So SBF has 25 years plus, by the way, $11 billion he has to pay. Does he even have that kind of money?
Yeah, so the forfeiture is part of the sentencing, and I was talking to a legal expert earlier who said that that is sort of the ceiling. The government has to come out and put a number on the amount that they can eventually claw back from Sam Bankman-Fried. So the assumption is that they don't necessarily think that Sam Bankman-Fried has $11 billion. That's sort of the cap of what they could go and fetch if they could find that. And it's possible he has billions of dollars based on what he raised at the time and some of the ability to hide cryptocurrency. So that's sort of an insurance policy. If they do get that, it goes into this DOJ fund that's held, and it could eventually go back to customers. But you're right on the unprecedented nature of this. Bernie Madoff was really the high-profile white-collar crime of the last 2 decades. His sentence, was more than 100 years, which was largely seen as symbolic. And there were a lot of people who predicted that Bankman-Fried's sentence could be more on the Bernie Madoff side. And there's a lot of parallels, although Bernie Madoff, was much older. So that's also something that played into sentencing. Sam Bankman-Fried is 32 years old, and the defense in this case said it's the prime of his life. Don't take that from him, and really made this emotional plea to the judge, saying he's a really young kid, made some mistakes, but he's a smart guy, and it's a disservice to society, as they said, taking someone like Bankman-Fried, having him in jail for that long. It's an emotional day here in court.
No kidding. Emotional, fascinating for many reasons. Kate Rooney, thank you for being there with us to start off the show tonight. Appreciate it. Let's take it to Baltimore, because in just about an hour from now, we will get new details, and we'll bring them to you live right here on that huge salvage mission in Baltimore. Crews on their way to clear out tons of metal and debris from that catastrophic bridge collapse after it was hit by a cargo ship. And right now, no end in sight.
This work is not going to take days. This work is not going to take weeks. We have a very long road ahead of us.
We're also just getting a clearer picture of what happened in those key 5 minutes leading up to this moment, that horrific scene captured on camera of the bridge coming down, a construction crew working on it, being plunged into the water below. At 1:24 in the morning, the cargo ship totally lost power. The pilot, according to officials, called for a tugboat and called for the anchor to drop, sending out a mayday call just moments before the ship, which by this point was out of control, crashed into the bridge. The NTSB, leading the investigation, putting out this new dramatic video of investigators on board that cargo ship, still in the middle of this river, nearly 72 hours after the collision. Divers right now are not able to search for the bodies still missing underneath this debris, under the concrete, under the steel, because it's still too dangerous. With so many questions still on when the divers will be able to make that journey, how long it'll take to clean the wreckage up, and when this port and this critical bridge could be back open. We've got team coverage. Jay Gray live for us in Baltimore. Ryan Nobles outside Orioles Stadium in Baltimore, where the team just took a moment of silence to honor the lives lost here. Jay, let me go to you first with where things stand on not just the investigation, but as we've seen now, the mangled wreckage that sits in the middle of the Patapsco River, the process of the cleanup.
Yeah, and let's talk first, Hallie, about the investigation expanding today. And I've been told that investigators from the NTSB have spent a lot of time in the engine room today. That, along with interviewing the crew, 21 mostly Indian crew members on that ship. And they are, I should tell you, staying on the ship. They are staying in their quarters and have been since the crash, and cooperating fully with this investigation. But in the engine room, they want to understand how the ship lost power and propulsion. We know that it was billowing black smoke from the stack just before the crash, so that's something they're paying close attention to right now. As for the salvage, of course, it can't start until the NTSB releases this site, gathers all the perishable evidence they can. But we already know that Navy vessels are heading to the crash site at this point, including a barge with a 1,000-ton lift and 3 more barges with massive revolving cranes. The Navy and Coast Guard will be the lead agencies on the salvage effort here. They'll cut apart what they can and haul all of that debris away from the shipping lanes here. That's going to take a lot of time. We've seen what's on top of the water and on top of that ship, but they still don't have a clear indication of what they're going to have to clear out underneath. And you talked about it. That's why divers are no longer in the water right now, and likely won't be for quite some time. In fact, just yesterday, they found 2 of the 6 missing victims. The other 4, they believe, will be found during the salvage process.
So then, Jay, as we look ahead to in just about 60 minutes from now, what we expect to hear, an update now from officials, what is the biggest question that is still unanswered in your mind?
Well, I think it's, when is this going to open? When are they going to reopen what is the 11th busiest port in the U.S.? Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to take some time. What I've been told is it will happen in stages, that they hope to clear away at least 1 lane that they can use for bringing ships in and sending ships out. But again, it's all up to what they find in the water once this equipment gets here.
Jay Gray, live for us there at the base of the bridge, what used to be the bridge there in Baltimore. Thank you. Ryan, let me go to you now, because you're further in. If people know Baltimore, they know Camden Yards, they know the Orioles. With this moment of silence here, honoring the lives lost, such an impact on the community there for not just Baltimore, but around the state.
Yeah, and Hallie, one of the things that Governor Wes Moore has really emphasized to his constituents is that this is going to take the entire effort of the entire community in order to deal with this recovery process. And people are going to be inconvenienced. It's going to be hard. It's going to be annoying at times. But they just need to understand that this was a catastrophic accident that is going to take time to build back from. And they really pointed to today here in this baseball game, opening day, Major League Baseball, a team that they have a lot of hope and optimism in, as a way to unify everyone in this community to show that Baltimore, Maryland in general, is unified in this effort to get past this difficult tragedy. Listen to what some of the fans that were at the game told me today about why this game is important and why they know the community will rally together. How big of an impact do you think it's going to be to not have the bridge there anymore? How will it impact you on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's going to be huge.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
I mean, just for the people just to get to work in that area. I mean,
as far as the economy for Baltimore, it's going to be devastating.
And it's one of those things where if you live anywhere near this area, that bridge not being there is going to impact you in some way, shape, or form. It's going to be very directly if you work at the port or you work at a company that has a connection to the port. But even if it's part of your daily commute, we're talking about the difference between maybe a 10 or 15-minute commute now becoming an hour or longer, especially as they adjust to all of this. And Hallie, the first responders, some of the people that were initially there, were honored today during the third inning. You could hear a pin drop in this ballpark when they brought three of those police officers out. This was the group that stopped traffic from going over the bridge at 1:30 in the morning and likely saved lives. They said in a statement that there's no amount of training that it could have prepared them for what happened on that night. Obviously, they were given a huge round of applause by the crowd here in Baltimore. Hallie.
Ryan Nobles live for us there at Camden Yards. Thank you. So listen, right as we were coming on the air, President Biden calling a stabbing spree in northern Illinois an act of senseless violence, offering that community support with 4 people dead, one family. Telling our own Maggie Vespa the suspect went into their home and tried to kill them, too. They say the only reason they're alive now is because one of their family members saved them with a bottle of syrup. Listen.
We were fighting for a couple minutes, and then she came upstairs, and he shifted focus onto her, went and clocked her a good one, and then he was getting ready to do it again, and then I grabbed a syrup bottle and started beating him with it.
If it wasn't for him, I don't think that I'd be standing talking to you right now. I really don't.
Wouldn't be talking to her right now. The victims, ranging in age from as young as 15 up to 63. You see their names here: Jay Larson, Ramona Lynn Schubach, Jacob Schubach, Jenna Newcomb. It happened in the city of Rockland just about 24 hours ago. Police say they went to the scene after getting multiple calls saying there were stabbings in the area. A 22-year-old is now in police custody, facing multiple charges, including murder. There's no indication that any other people were involved, according to police. Shaquille Brewster is joining us now. And Shaq, this was... It appeared to be a random act of violence that is now drawing comparisons to a scene out of Grand Theft Auto, just based on the sheer sort of senselessness of what happened here. The suspect in court today. Talk us through what we know and where this goes.
Yeah, one witness comparing it to Grand Theft Auto because of just how random it appeared to be. And investigators earlier today explained that from what they have been told, they believe that this suspect knew one of the victims and he was at the victim's house. And police say this started because Soto believed that the drugs they were smoking, marijuana, was laced with something, and became paranoid and grabbed a knife. And that's what started this rampage that you saw on that map there. Ended up hitting 4 other locations and included this suspect being accused of breaking into multiple other homes, beating a 15-year-old with a bat, and then running over and stabbing a postal worker twice. So a really gruesome scene that was described there in Rockford. And he's now facing some 13 charges, Hallie, 4 involving first-degree murder, 7 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of home invasion with a dangerous weapon. We saw that suspect in court earlier today, and the judge denied pretrial release.
Talk through the community here, which is reeling, and we heard it a little bit in that interview with our colleague Maggie Vespa, who, as you know, is out there talking to folks, but this has had such an impact on them.
Yeah, you really get the sense of just how much this has rocked this community, which, by the way, has been grieving another stabbing that was separate from this just last week. The mayor said that they've been calling in grief counselors and that they had to have more grief counselors come in because of the need in that community. And you really saw the emotion from the mayor during the press conference. Listen to one of the details that he mentioned involving one of the victims who was killed in this rampage.
Jenna died saving her sister and her friend and protecting them from further harm.
There is another victim who is injured and is still in the hospital, who is currently intubated, according to officials. And you mentioned that in the past couple of minutes, we just heard from President Biden, who, of course, offered his thoughts and prayers to the entire community. He also said that he's thinking of those injured and hope that they make a full recovery, and says that his administration will do everything in its power to help the people of Rockford and the broader community recover from this traumatic event. Trauma, Hallie, is something that you continue to hear over and over, in a sense that you felt as you listened to officials brief the media earlier today.
Shaq, thank you very much for having that reporting for us, for being there for us, covering this. We've got more on this story with Nightly News on Lester Holt. 6:30, you're going to hear more of that interview with those survivors that we showed you in just a little bit. Out east, they're getting slammed with some big-time rain tonight, with more than 12 million people at risk of flooding. It's making the commute home pretty ugly. Look at this live shot of Boston. Traffic's backing up. It always does, but it's messier than usual, considering the weather is messier than usual as well. Let's bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman for more. How long is this one going to last, especially with another storm coming right on its heels for the West Coast, right?
Yeah, Hallie, we could always count on some rain to give us a headache during that afternoon commute. That's exactly what it's doing, and we've got a couple of storm systems that we're watching in the east and the west. Let's start with the east. There's that rain that you mentioned that has lots of people under flood alerts right now. Parts of the coastal areas in the mid-Atlantic still dealing with that heavy rain. New York to Boston and points north of that still dealing with the rain as well. There's some of the flood alerts that we're looking at. Some of these are going to expire. Places like the mid-Atlantic, those will expire by the time today ends. The farther north you go, those will stick with us into tomorrow. And here's why. Places like New York, Philadelphia, you're going to see the rain wrap up tonight. But notice Boston to points into Maine, you're going to see the rain stick around for that early morning commute. You'll still see some rain in the 6 a.m. hour if you're headed out early for work tomorrow in Boston. And some wet snow will start to wrap around the backside of this system. We move out west. We've got not one, but two storm systems we're watching. The first one has been impacting folks across parts of the Pacific Northwest today. We're still going to see some of that rain continue into the late afternoon and evening hours for folks there. But here comes this system. This one's going to be a little farther to the south. So you'll see places like the Bay Area getting buckets of rain over the next day or next 2 days or so. By the time we get into Saturday, notice Southern California gets in on the action. We see this move into parts of the desert Southwest, Nevada, parts of Arizona will pick up some rain, and we could see some ample amounts. We're concerned about some flooding, of course, but the landslides, the mudslides, all on the table here as we get into the weekend. This is going to last through Sunday. Some of those spots 1 to 3 inches across parts of Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, and points south into San Diego. We could see the good amount of soaking rain. When it comes to the snow, parts of the Sierra Range, you're going to pick up anywhere from 12 to 18 and up to 2 feet of snow by the time we get through Sunday. Notice the Rockies get in on this action as well. We'll see some additional snowfall and some of those highest peaks for folks in that region as we head into the weekend and these systems start to move east, Hallie.
Angie Lastman, thank you very much for that forecast. Appreciate it. To New York now, some pretty big protests there right in Midtown focused on the war in Gaza. You can see some of those officers there with some demonstrators behind them, to the side of them, protesting right outside of what's expected to be a big money, multi-presidential fundraiser for President Biden, where he's going to appear with two of his predecessors, a star-studded event. It's a cliche, but in this instance, the shoe fits. It's going down at Radio City Music Hall with Mr. Biden, President Biden, joined by former Presidents Obama and Clinton, and some famous names, Stephen Colbert, Lizzo, Mindy Kaling, and more. The campaign expects us to bring in like $25 million. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is following this one from New York. You know, famed photographer Annie Leibovitz is taking pictures. We talked about the stars that are there. It's an event curated by Anna Wintour. And yet, just like so many other events that President Biden has attended, the specter of protests related to his handling of the war between Israel and Hamas is a shadow here.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. And look, you'll be able to hear it during this live report. Just behind the camera from me, you hear, these protesters that have converged here at Radio City Music Hall here in Midtown Manhattan. And this is something that the Biden campaign has been dealing with now for quite some time, and certainly has some Democrats worried heading into the 2024 campaign. But as you mentioned, Hallie, this fundraiser tonight, 5,000 people expected, according to the campaign. $25 million potentially. Again, that's a figure put out by the campaign. And those celebrities that you mentioned, Lizzo, Queen Latifah, Stephen Colbert, and this is all in an attempt to put up a united front against former President Trump after the State of the Union address, Hallie.
It's effectively part of the start of the general election campaign. That campaign has already begun in earnest here. But the Biden team seems to be hoping to really start this off with a bang. Explain some of the context there for the Biden campaign. Because this is more than just like, steak and a side. Like, this is not your usual rubber chicken dinner. This is like big time, big lights. It's not Broadway, but it is, Times Square.
No, it is a big deal, and the campaign says that it's the first of its kind event. $25 million is quite a bit, Hallie, and as you know, over the last several months, Democrats have outpaced Republicans in terms of fundraising. But as you said, after the State of the Union, heading into the crux of the general election, the Biden campaign has really been ramping up its travel. Earlier this week, we saw the Vice President and the President in North Carolina. They have been to several battleground states, 8 battleground states since the State of the Union, and we've also been seeing former President Obama take an increasingly active role in this campaign. Now, earlier today, you saw the former president and the current President Biden on Air Force One, getting off, coming here to New York. The Biden campaign hope that this gets a lot of attention. You're looking at the video right there.
Yeah.
This is a huge deal for the Biden campaign, and they are really trying to make a moment out of this as they try to raise as much money as possible.
And the Obama-Biden of it all is so interesting, considering the popularity that not just former President Obama, but former First Lady Michelle Obama has still inside the Democratic Party, despite polling showing that there is an enthusiasm gap with Democrats as it relates to President Biden, at least at the moment here. Part of that, Gabe, and I just want to, I don't know if you're like locked into that live shot there, but just to give people some context, you're right in front of Radio City Music Hall, which is right across the street from 30 Rock for folks who have been to New York. This is central in Manhattan. It looks like the police, I mean, this is obviously a demonstration that appears to be peaceful here. The police are allowing that to happen. I don't know if we can see it all, anything else behind you on that.
Sure, Hallie. Well, let me set the scene for you. We are locked down. This is a very secure area, so we can't really move the camera. But you can just hear them. Basically, there's several dozen protesters, very loud protesters, right on the other side of the camera. And, some of their signs show Free Palestine or else. Our resistance
and the president has been, Gabe, interrupted before. I was just going to say, he's been interrupted even in the room by protesters in the past at fundraisers, at events, et cetera. This is now part of like the regularity of his. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's happened quite a bit. And listen, we were in Michigan not too long ago, and as you know, the protesters there mounted a campaign of their own of sorts to vote uncommitted as a protest against President Biden and his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. This is certainly a concern. And then you hear them saying, Biden, Biden, you can hide. They are directly going after President Biden. And this is something that the campaign is trying to counter, trying to get the enthusiasm by bringing in the big guns, so to speak, former President Clinton and former President Obama.
Gabe Gutierrez with a front row seat, figuratively, if not literally, there at Radio City Music Hall. Gabe, thank you. Not too far from Midtown, a much more somber event attended by a different former president, Donald Trump, at the wake of an NYPD officer killed in the line of duty on Monday. Officer Jonathan Diller, who was shot after he approached a car parked illegally. The suspected shooter and the driver of that car are now in custody. Mr. Trump's attendance at this wake lines up with his rhetoric around crime in the city. He said late last year, violent crime there had, quote, hit unimaginable records. Fact check on that, the gut check, the reality check. NYPD data shows nearly pretty much all major crime is down in the city compared to this time last year. NBC's Rahima Ellis is outside that wake, not too far from the downtown part of Manhattan, of New York City. Talk us through what we're seeing today here, Rahima.
Well, there is a lull in activity right now, Hallie. Behind me is the funeral home where the wake is underway for this 31-year-old New York City police officer, Jonathan Diller, a fallen officer who leaves behind a wife and a young child, only 9 months old. And you talked about the circumstances under which he was killed. Earlier today, there was just hundreds of people who lined up in the pouring rain to come and pay their respects. There will be another viewing later this afternoon. And former President Trump was here also. I have to tell you, it seemed like his mood was more subdued and his tone seemed to meet the moment that people were in. And that was, this is a shattered community and a police department that is just shattered and angry as well over the death of this young officer. So the former president, he talked about having visited with the family for about half an hour and about crime, but in a much more subdued tone. Take a listen.
What happened is such a sad event, such a horrible thing, and it's happening all too often, and we have to stop it. We have to stop it. We have to get back to law and order. We have to do a lot of things differently.
One of the things that you mentioned, Hallie, about the crime in the city, well, the former president is saying it's up. NYPD numbers show that major crime in the city is down something like 2.3% from this time last year. But for this family that is grieving, in this community that is mourning, those numbers mean very little to them today. Hallie?
Rahima Ellis, live for us there in New York. Rahima, thank you. We got a lot more to get to coming up on the show, including TikTok doing something more like something a political action committee would do. Big ad buy with lawmakers considering banning TikTok. We'll tell you which states the company is targeting and what it says about their strategy. Plus, Pope Francis leading a Holy Week service after months of health issues. What he's warning priests ahead of a busy weekend. Uber's big Beyonce reveal this afternoon. Maybe a little less throw your keys up and a little more throw your phone across the room for some fans. We'll explain in the 5 things. But first, overseas, Pope Francis out in public today, perhaps trying to signal a show of strength ahead of the holiest week in the Catholic religion. This is the Pope leading Mass this morning in front of hundreds of Roman priests. And later on, participating even from his wheelchair in the traditional washing of the feet at a women's prison. Remember, he's 87 years old, and there had been so many questions about his health over the past few months. He's been dealing with bronchitis. He's been dealing with the flu. Questions that only intensified ahead of this critical week for the Pope and for Catholics around the world. Josh Letterman is joining us now. So, Josh, you know, you look at the Pope, and observers said it seems like he was looking strong. He was able to participate in some of these things that always happen at the start of Easter weekend here. Talk us through it and the spotlight on the Pope this week.
Well, it's been really up and down for the Pope in the last few months, as you laid out, Hallie. It was not at all clear whether or not he would give that homily today. It was only over the weekend when he, in fact, did not give the homily that was prepared, although he did preside over the service. And it was just 1 month ago today that the Pope was last brought to the hospital, as he's been dealing with all of these respiratory issues. But for now, at least, he did seem to be up to the task. We'll have to see how that plays out over the next few days, as he has a really jam-packed schedule of other Easter events. Really, for the next 3 days, we expect to see him out and about every single day. But it was so interesting today to see how his message, as he begins this holy period of Easter, Hallie, was really not directed so much at Catholic followers, but really at priests. The Pope delivering a message to Catholic priests that he said he wants them to avoid clerical hypocrisy. He wants them to focus on mercy, on having respect and empathy for their followers as opposed to judging them. And as you know, Hallie, this is a Pope who has faced a lot of criticism, especially from Catholic bishops in the United States who feel like he's too liberal, too lenient. Here, the Pope, as he gave this unexpected homily, making clear he wants to see more compassion, less judgment from his priests as he heads into this holy Easter holiday. Hallie?
Josh Letterman live for us there overseas tonight. Thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Tampa Bay Rays putting their all-star player Wander Franco on administrative leave until June. It's part of an agreement between the league and the Players Association. Remember, Franco is being investigated in the Dominican Republic over an alleged relationship with a minor. He has not been formally charged yet, but he hasn't played since last August when these allegations first came out. Number 2, the Senate set to get impeachment articles against the Homeland Security Secretary on April 10th, according to House Speaker Mike Johnson. It'll then be up to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to get the trial going. He's agreed to do that. Remember, House Republicans narrowly voted to impeach Mayorkas in February over his handling of the border. Number 3, supermodel Karlie Kloss and her husband, Josh Kushner, are planning to relaunch Life magazine. It's iconic, right? The front cover, always some of the best photography work in the world. It stopped publishing regularly back in 2008, but Kloss and Kushner say they want to start it back up as a print and digital brand next year. Number 4, Beyonce fans online. Not super impressed by Uber's promotional tie-in with Beyonce's new album release. So the rideshare company is offering 16% off your ride, up to $16 because of the single 16 carriages. That is like $2.50, maybe, despite teasing 24 hours ago an announcement that could rock the world. This is Lyft, our marketing team tonight. Sleeping like babies. Number 5, Billy Joel playing his 100th consecutive show tonight at Madison Square Garden. He's been doing a residence there for the past 10 years monthly, but he's only got a few more left. His 150th and final MSG show will happen in July. Also tonight, a big ad buy, not from a politician or a super PAC, but from the company behind one of the most popular apps in the country. Because TikTok is trying to fight back tonight, going up with a $2 million ad buy aimed at blocking that bill heading for the Senate that could ultimately ban TikTok in the U.S. if its Chinese-based owner doesn't spin off the company. Here's a little bit of the new ad.
Think about the 5 million small business owners that rely on TikTok to provide for their families.
The village is always there for the moms on TikTok.
To see all of that disappear would be so sad.
It's going to affect a lot of people's livelihoods.
So you see it there, real people, right? Small business owners talking about what a TikTok ban could mean for them. The ads running in these 5 key battleground states, all represented by vulnerable Senate Democrats up for re-election. Brian Schwartz is joining us now. Brian, it's great to see you. And what's so interesting, this is so much more out of like the Washington politics playbook here than the playbook you typically cover on CNBC, right? Or the business playbook. Talk about the end game here, the way that TikTok is really trying to use some lobbying leverage to put pressure on these vulnerable Democrats.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it looks like the TikTok really is trying to push out this message of the need for the app to help small businesses. And, when you go through that ad, and I'm sure similar spots that are going to come out shortly, the message is very clear. They want their users to make it clear to the public and possibly lawmakers how important the app is to them in really a pressure campaign, and really an interesting and unique pressure campaign where it's not really directly, lobbyists going to Washington necessarily. It's more turning to the user and saying, listen, make this message clear to Washington that you want the app to remain as is, and see how it all plays out. And really, we don't even know where this bill is going to go in the Senate yet, but that makes this ad campaign even more interesting.
Help us put this into context, right? Because TikTok is worth a gazillion, bajillion dollars or whatever. It's worth a ton of money. So $2 million, that's a lot of money to me. Not so much to TikTok, but this does seem to be a signal of the concern that TikTok has. Is it also a sign of like more to come on that front?
Well, TikTok told us that this is, or at least suggested us, this is really just the beginning, right? That the 2.1 million is not going to be the full number once this is all done. They didn't tell us the exact amount with that, whatever that means. But also, let's keep this in mind. So beyond the TV ads, the company informed us that there are going to be billboards at train stations and bus stations. There's also going to be a digital ad component to this as well. So this is going to be a little bit more widespread, even beyond the television ads. And the impact of that, we'll have to wait and see.
Brian Schwartz from CNBC. Good to see you, friend. Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
When we come back, some storm clouds over MLB's opening day. And we're not talking about the weather, how the league's navigating this big gambling scandal right at the start of the season. Plus, take a look at this. Oof. A car flip. And then watch this. Good Samaritans rushing in to help. It's pretty incredible. We're going to show it to you in just a sec. In Georgia, former President Trump's attorneys today open for a long shot, arguing the First Amendment gets him off the hook in his election interference case, saying that what Mr. Trump said is constitutionally protected by free speech. Words the state says was were part of a wide-ranging criminal conspiracy to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election.
It's protected. The only reason it becomes unprotected, in the state's opinion, is because they call it false.
It's not just that they were false. It's not that the defendant has been hauled into a courtroom because the prosecution doesn't like what he said. These statements are part of criminal conduct that is larger than just the false statement on its own.
Now, the hearing comes after Mr. Trump's team failed to get Fulton County DA Fani Willis kicked off the case over an alleged romantic relationship with a prosecutor who was leading it, who has since recused himself. Blaine Alexander is outside court in Atlanta.
Well, Hallie, first I'll talk about what we heard inside the courtroom today, and then I'll kind of discuss the overall significance of today's hearing. So what we heard in the courtroom is just as you laid out. Basically, the former president, through his attorney, Steve Sadow, is making the argument that what's being alleged in this indictment falls into the category of political speech and therefore is covered and protected by the First Amendment. But the state, as you may imagine, is pushing back on that, basically saying that everything that's being alleged falls under the category of one of those acts, the supporting acts that basically make up an alleged criminal conspiracy. Here's a little bit of what we heard, the back and forth in the courtroom. Take a look.
What the state wants to do is say, we have a goal. We have an objective here that we have put forward. Steal the election in an unlawful fashion. I say change that for a second to legitimate concern about the validity of the election.
These statements made by the defendant were all employed as part of criminal activity, various conspiracies, frauds, intentions with deceit, and violations of the law.
So, Hallie, we should know in the days to come how the judge is going to rule on that motion. But I want to talk about the overall significance of today's hearing. What we saw in the courtroom is certainly not too unusual. It's something that defense attorneys doing what they do, trying to get charges dismissed, and we'll likely see it again before this case goes to trial. But what it represents is basically it shows that the Georgia case now against the former president is back on track. You know very well, for the past 2.5 months, all of the hearings and all of the discussion around this case had centered around that motion to remove Fani Willis from the case and those allegations of impropriety and conflict of interest. Well, now that the judge has basically ruled on that and kind of moved that aside, the case is moving forward. Now, as for where things stand with Fani Willis, there is still a possibility that we could see some movement there. That's because the judge has given a green light for Trump and his co-defendants to appeal. They've indicated that they certainly plan to do that, but they're going to move forward on parallel tracks right now. So even though this appeal is going to make its way through an appellate court, we also know that Judge Scott McAfee has made it clear that the Georgia case will continue to proceed as scheduled, and he will continue to hear motions going forward. Hallie.
Our thanks to Blaine Alexander for that reporting. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, police in New York have arrested a suspect for allegedly punching a woman in the face. We've been telling you about this. Multiple women on TikTok saying they were attacked randomly walking around Manhattan in broad daylight. Police say they don't know whether these incidents are all related, but they are investigating. Also out of our Northeast Bureau, a robotic dog helping to save the day in Massachusetts. Police sent Roscoe, their animatronic canine, into a house during a standoff with a suspect. They say doing that let them figure out what was going on inside without risking the lives of human officers. The suspect eventually shot Roscoe the robot 3 times before police arrested him. The manufacturer now says it wants to keep Roscoe for research and that state police will get a replacement. And out of our Southern Bureau, take a look at this video out of Daytona Beach. This SUV flips on its side, bad crash, and then people stop. All these Good Samaritans rushing in to help. They go over there, they push, push, push. You can see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 or 7 guys there flipping it back. Incredibly, amazingly, everybody is expected to be okay. Unbelievable. So, look at that. Baseball, opening day, crack of the bat, whip of the pitch. The big story today, as it has been for a lot of the offseason, is Shohei Ohtani making his first appearance as a Dodger at Dodger Stadium right now. He's got a hit, he's got a walk, he scored a run. Baseball is hoping the season will take the focus off the investigation into that gambling scandal with Ohtani, accusing his former interpreter of stealing millions from him. The commissioner saying today he's hoping MLB's investigation will be quick. But for fans all over the country, it's about the game on the field. Morgan Chesky is joining us now from one of those fields, the home of the World Series champion Texas Rangers. So listen, this Ohtani shadow has been hanging over the start of the baseball season. The Major League Baseball community is hoping that once things get going where you are and all around the country, after the first pitch goes off, people will focus more on the game itself, right?
Yeah, that's the idea, Hallie. I mean, opening day is opening day. For a lot of baseball fans, they say it's bigger than Christmas. People I've spoken to say they took off work months ago to make sure they were able to make it to this game here in Arlington for the Rangers, but all across the country, that's the case. Obviously, it's good to have this sport back, but as you mentioned, the Los Angeles Dodgers, if they don't win the World Series this year, a lot of people are going to call that a disappointment simply because of the roster they have constructed around Shohei Ohtani. And again, let's just take a quick peek at what that record contract entails. We're talking 10 years, $700 million, and it's the construction of that contract that's very interesting too, Hallie, because so much of it is deferred until the latter years of his contract, enabling the team to be a little creative in those first few years when he's on the team as they really make that push for a championship run. But here you have this $700 million man now somewhat caught up in this gambling scandal with his longtime friend and interpreter, accused by Ohtani of stealing $4.5 million to pay off a sports bookie that's now part of a federal investigation. We heard from Dodgers star Mookie Betts earlier this week, kind of just reinforcing the fact that they just want to focus on baseball. And certainly that's just the vibe here right now. We know it's going to be a sold-out crowd here at Globe Life Field in Arlington. That includes standing room only, as everyone will look to welcome the World Series champs. There's a big banner that's going to come down not too far away from where we're standing. Hallie, they kept the roof closed because they don't want any wind to potentially be a problem for that banner to unfurl ever so perfectly and remind everyone who the World Series champs are.
Good for them. They earned it. So what happens after your live shots? You just get to hang out and watch the game?
No, the game's not starting here for another couple hours, but it's been very fun to people watch and just see the teams warm up on the field. It's no complaints at all.
Well, there's also a piece of this too, Morgan. Like, I think you should just hang. Like, I don't know who's producing you, if it's Amy or what, but you guys just hang and like watch. But the rule change is interesting too, because, and I was at a spring training game not too long ago. I mean, the pitch clock, it goes, right? It tries to really make the game a little speedier, a little bit more enjoyable for some of the fans here, maybe get people to see a little bit more action.
Yeah, it's interesting how time changes things. Back in 2023, this pitch clock, incredibly polarizing. People were saying it was taking away from the game. Now that we've had 1 year in, they've tweaked it a little bit, but a lot of the fans I've spoken to say that they love it because what would have been a 3.5, 4 hour game, now potentially a 3 or 2.5 hour game. And because of the tweaks here, let's just touch on some of the rule changes here. So last year, if there was nobody on base, pitcher has to deliver the ball in 15 seconds. If there is someone on base, they had 20 seconds. This season, down to 18. They're trying to tighten that game even more. A couple notable changes from last season that people will remember are that particularly they had the larger bases because the drop in stolen bases had been happening. And then they banned the shift, so the fielders could not align a certain way here, Hallie. The game always evolving, but here is what the manager of the Rangers had to say about the sport changing. Take a listen.
There's more action, and so I think fans are enjoying it. They're having a lot more fun with it. I know you're seeing teams trying to steal more bases now, so it's all about entertaining the fans too. We can't forget that.
And they'll certainly be entertaining a lot of fans tonight. Baseball is back, and from the looks of things, people couldn't be happier. Hallie?
Do those people include Baby L? Does she have a Rangers onesie yet?
Oh, man, that is a fantastic question because Olivia grew up in New York. So Eleanor's allegiance baseball-wise, it's still up for grabs.
I don't want to cause familial strife for you and the new baby. I don't want to cause any problems. Morgan Chesky had to ask. Thank you, Fred. I'm glad you're there.
Yeah.
Tell Olivia we said hi. Talk to you. Coming up here on the show, a lot more to get to. We are going from the baseball field to the rest of the headlines around the country, including why Mpox cases are on the rise again in the U.S. after that big outbreak a couple years ago. We'll tell you what officials are hoping will stop the surge soon. We're learning tonight Mpox cases are once again on the rise in this country because vaccination rates aren't where they need to be. Remember, this started getting a lot of attention a couple years ago. There was a big outbreak. People were developing these really intense rashes on their skin. Right now, cases in the U.S. are twice as high as they were this time last year. The virus spread through close personal contact. Anybody can get it, but men who have sex with men are at higher risk, and people with HIV are more vulnerable to death and some other really, obviously, serious outcomes. Symptoms kind of like the flu: fever, chills, exhaustion, headache, muscle weakness, followed by this rash. Dr. Akshay Syal is joining us now. So this was big news back in 2022. It feels like there was some control on it in 2023, but now the numbers are where they are again here, spiking. Why?
Hey, Hallie, you know, so when we first talked about Mpox about 2 years ago, you remember seeing those long lines when the vaccine came out here in New York. It took a while to get the vaccine, and what we found as the dust settled, Hallie, is that, you know, in New York, 33% of people who should be vaccinated for this are actually vaccinated. There's many states across the U.S. where that number is less than 10%. I believe the highest we've seen now in D.C. is just at 68% of people at risk of Mpox are actually getting vaccinated. So, you know, the disease gets introduced some way or the other, and what happens is that people who are at high risk aren't getting the vaccine like they should, and the disease keeps circulating in the environment. So really, really important for people to get the vaccine.
What should people do? Right? Talk to us about some of the things, the steps. I mean, do we need to be having another big vaccination push here? What about people who've already gotten the shot? Do they need boosters?
You know, I think a lot of people consider what we did in 2022 a huge success, the way that Mpox was rising quite quickly, and then it came down quickly as well, Hallie. And I think that's because what we did so effectively was that we targeted messaging, right? So who's most at risk of Mpox? It's men who have sex with men, and those who have HIV are at really high risk of disease. So you remember they were going to, you know, to pride parades in the summer and handing out vaccines and really targeted messaging. That can be tricky, right? You don't want to stigmatize a group of people, but at the same time, you have to be honest and say this is where the disease is spreading most, and we recommend you get vaccinated. So I think you're going to start to see some of that targeted messaging start to come, especially as we get closer to summer, just to limit as much of the disease as we can.
Dr. Akshay Syal, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Still
Anytime.
to come, how the music industry is trying to get out in front of any disruption and dealing with AI's impact on its future. That's next. Tonight, the start of a stunning 25 years behind bars for the king of crypto turned convict, sentenced for his multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme. What made a judge come down so hard on SBF? In just a minute. Plus, in Baltimore, new details in just a couple of minutes, and an update you will watch live right here on what is now a mission to clear away twisted metal and debris from that deadly bridge collapse. We're live on the ground with what we're learning, and when the governor speaks, we'll bring it to you. Plus, what the survivors of a deadly urban ambush are telling us about the terrifying moment a man came after them in an attack being compared to a scene from Grand Theft Auto. And in New York, a parade of presidents, current and former, the star-studded Biden fundraiser attended by 3 heads of state, while former President Trump cuts a contrast at a police officer's wake. We've got more on that from New York in just a minute. Plus, over at the Vatican, Pope Francis, perhaps trying to signal some strength after a string of health issues. His message to the priests kicking off the holiest week in Catholicism a little later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we start with the massive blow for the mastermind of a multi-billion-dollar crypto fraud scheme. A stunning 25 years in prison for Sam Bankman-Fried, you see him there, and an $11 billion fine. The judge deciding the sentence, saying he'd never seen, in his words, a performance like SBF's trial testimony, saying that if Bankman-Fried wasn't outright lying, he was evasive. Bankman-Fried is trying to paint a really different picture of himself before the sentencing came down, telling the court what he did haunts him every day, that it's been excruciating to watch the consequences of all this unfold, that his customers don't deserve this level of pain, as he puts it. His attorney says they plan to appeal, with his parents there for the sentencing. You see him there, arriving to the courthouse today, in a statement writing they're heartbroken, that they will continue to fight for their son. Remember, back in November, SBF was convicted of stealing money from FTX customers and lying to investors in this huge fraud scheme that ended up collapsing what was once the world's most popular crypto exchange platform. It was a huge trial. We covered a ton on this show, with the prosecutor involved in that trial saying this sentence tonight is a warning to others who might be tempted to do something like it. Kate Rooney is joining us now. 25 years, $11 billion. This is not nothing, right? I mean, this is a big deal, especially because it's the first of its kind of sentence for like a crypto crime like this. That said, there's an appeal coming. What are the chances that's successful?
So I was just on the phone with someone, Hallie, a legal expert who's been doing this for a long time, and said it's low single digits chances that an appeal ends up working out for Sam Bankman-Fried. It could take a couple of years. And he said as well that it's likely that he ends up serving, 88, 85% of that sentence. So it's going to be close to 20 years. It could take a couple of years until he actually ends up going to jail. They're saying that it may be somewhere out in the Bay Area where his family is based. But it is a major shot across the bow from the government to say to any crypto company, doesn't matter what you're doing, it's not this new fancy asset class. If you're committing fraud, it's the same as any kind of old-fashioned financial fraud. And they really tried to say, we take it seriously, and try to use this as a warning to other kind of tech startups, crypto founders. There is a sense of, prosecution's looking extra hard at this asset class, and Sam Bankman-Fried is really an example of that. They tried to make that clear.
An example of that, not in New York, like not even just in the United States, but around the world, right? Yeah. I mean, this is so high profile. What's the scene like out there? I mean, is it just like a crush of people?
Yeah, well, it's been fascinating. Like you said, very much a global crime case. So he was based in the Bahamas. This conglomerate, really, that he ran spread from Hong Kong to Singapore to Antigua. The amount of affiliates that FTX had across the globe, it really was not just a U.S. crime issue. And you had a lot of coordination between all of these global, whether it was DOJ and some of the prosecutors abroad. So when it comes to crypto, I think there's a sense that, yes, there is a lot more awareness when it comes to these sort of crimes. But yeah, global asset class. And that's one of the things, too. If you look at, we talked about the Bernie Madoff case as a big comparison. That's one of the big differences in this. In terms of the reach, the dollar amount might have been bigger in the Madoff case, but the reach for Sam Bankman-Fried was so much more global and hit so many more individuals that that is one key difference that people have been pointing out here.
I wonder if that's why we heard from the Attorney General, who doesn't weigh in, like, on every sentence that ever comes down, but he is talking about this one, saying that anybody who thinks they can get away with something like this should think twice, coming in from Attorney General Merrick Garland. How much is this resonating in the crypto world, Kate?
I think you're spot on there. I think one of the other things that they're trying to make clear is you also can't take your crimes offshore and think you're going to get away with it. If you're starting a crypto company here and say, we're going to move down to the Bahamas, maybe we can get away with a little more and take some risk. And in this case, use customer money to ingratiate ourselves. I think that's why Merrick Garland would come out and say, yeah, you can't do this. And we took down a global cryptocurrency empire. So don't think you can get away with it if you're just going to move your company offshores.
Kate Rooney, live for us there outside court in New York. Kate, we're glad to have you. Thank you so much for starting us off tonight. To Baltimore now, because any minute we expect new details on that huge salvage mission in Baltimore. That's the microphone where we expect to get an update from Maryland's governor, from other state and local officials. We think maybe in the next 10 minutes or so, with crews now on their way to clear out tons of metal and debris after that catastrophic bridge collapse. And right now, no end to this mission in sight.
This work is not going to take days. This work is not going to take weeks. We have a very long road ahead of us.
So how do we get here? How do we get to this moment, that horrific collapse after a cargo ship slammed into one of the pillars of the bridge after losing power? Well, we're now getting a clearer picture of the 5 minutes leading up to the moment you just watched. At 1:24 a.m., that ship totally lost power, with the pilot calling for a tugboat and for the anchor to drop, sending out a mayday call credited with saving lives, just moments before the ship, which at this point is now out of control, crashed into the bridge. The NTSB, leading the investigation, has put out this video of investigators on board that huge cargo ship. A ship, by the way, it's still in the middle of the Patapsco River, some 72 hours after that horrific collision. Divers right now are not able to search for the bodies that still have not been recovered. It's too dangerous to go down there. The bodies believed to be buried under the concrete, under the steel at the bottom of the frigid water. So many questions still on when the divers can go back down, how long it'll take to clean this wreckage up, how long it'll take to get this river open, this port open, this bridge rebuilt. We've got team coverage tonight. Jay Gray in Baltimore. Ryan Nobles is near Camden Yards, where the Orioles just paid tribute just to honor the lives lost here. Jay, let me start with you here and give us an update on where things stand with the families of the 4 people whose bodies still have not been recovered, living a nightmare. And this major update just a couple minutes away.
Yeah, and it's a blow to those 4 families looking for some type of closure that divers will not go back into the water for any time in the near future. They understand the situation, though. It comes just a day after recovering 2 of what were at least 6 people missing as a result of the collapse. And the problem for divers is they were basically working in pitch black darkness in what is a soup of dangerous debris and rubble, and at oftentimes feeling their way through with their hands. A lot of sharp objects down there, a lot of things that could rip a wetsuit, rip an airline. And so it's been determined that the areas they could safely search have been searched, and they can't continue anymore. We do know that the crew that was working, doing maintenance on the bridge at the time of the accident was on a break and were in their cars resting early in the morning there. The 2 that were recovered were inside of a pickup, and sonar has led recovery teams to believe that there may be other vehicles buried along with the debris. So they are thinking that the recovery will continue with the salvage effort, that they may be able to find those 4 who are still missing right now. Let's talk a little bit about the investigation. We know that it's expanded today, as you just talked about. We had NTSB investigators back on the ship today, focused on analyzing data, not only from the voyage data recorder, but other recorders that are on board that ship, and spending a lot of time, I'm told, in the engine room. We know that black smoke was pouring from the stack of that ship as it lost power and propulsion just before the crash. They're trying to gather all the perishable evidence they can right now, all of the things that will be lost once they turn this area over to salvage teams. That's going to take some time, and then as those salvage teams move in, remember, they've got to first move a lot of that debris, figure out what is underneath the water here, and then cut a lot of that debris and move it into an area outside of the shipping lanes. That's going to be vital. They want to rush in and get as much done as quickly as they can, but again, not until the investigation on site is complete.
Jay Gray live for us there in Baltimore. Jay, thanks. Ryan, I want to go to you now in a different spot in Baltimore, obviously closer to Camden Yards, where there is this very emotional moment of silence here meant to honor this horrific crash, this horrific accident, it appears, and the lives lost. Let me play that.
Let us join together in a moment of silence for those who lost their lives in the tragedy of Francis Scott Key Bridge on Tuesday morning.
That moment of silence there, by all accounts, from people who were on the ground and you were in the stadium, seemed incredibly powerful for so many in this community.
That's exactly right, Hallie. You know, especially because there was so much energy and excitement about the start of this Orioles baseball season, and everybody that was walking into the stadium today was pumped, and you heard them all get very quiet when it came to that moment of silence, because there is a recognition that this is a tragedy that really impacts everyone that lives in this community. You know, we talked to a lot of fans here today. They were certainly excited for the start of the baseball season, but they understood and recognized just how much work is ahead for this community as they deal with the repairs to the bridge, deal with reopening the harbor, and then also the potential loss of employment and other things connected to all the work that happens in that area. Listen to what one family told me about the impact of this bridge coming down to the people that live here. How big of an impact do you think it's going to be to not have the bridge there anymore? How will it impact you on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's going to be huge.
It's going to be huge. Yeah. I mean, just for the people just to get to work in that area. I mean,
as far as the economy for Baltimore, it's going to be devastating.
Now, the one thing they did say, though, is that the people of this town are very resilient, that they're going to figure out ways to continue to go on with their lives despite having this huge inconvenience. And there is a real sense that they need to come together. That's part of what they tried to do here at this baseball game today, try and lock arms and recognize that the community is a lot stronger if they're working together as opposed to if they're heading in different directions, even though they know that this is going to be a long and difficult process. Yeah. And, you know, their Orioles helped them out in a big way here today, Hallie, winning big time 11-3 to start their season. Hallie.
Yeah, a nice moment for a city that really needs one. Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. On the left side of your screen, you can see just a couple minutes from now that press conference set to start We don't know what we'll hear. We don't know how significant it will be, but we know that the Maryland governor will speak along with Baltimore's mayor. Both of them, by the way, you saw there in some of that video that we showed you next to Ryan, attending the Orioles game a little bit earlier. We will bring this to you live the second that it starts. But for now, we've got some other developing news out of Illinois, with President Biden calling a stabbing spree there an act of senseless violence. 4 people killed, one family, telling our own Maggie Vespa that the suspect went into their home, tried to kill them, too. They say the only reason they're alive is because one of their relatives saved them with a bottle of syrup. Listen.
We were fighting for a couple minutes, and then she came upstairs, and he shifted focus onto her, went and clocked her a good one, and then he was getting ready to do it again, and then I grabbed a syrup bottle and started beating him with it.
If it wasn't for him, I don't think that I'd be standing talking to you right now. I really don't.
The victims, ranging in age from as young as 15 up to 63, Jay Larson, Ramona Lynn Schubach, Jacob Schubach, Jenna Newcomb. It happened here in the city of Rockland yesterday, just about 24 hours ago. Police say they showed up at the scene after getting a bunch of calls reporting just stabbings nearby. A 22-year-old is now in custody, facing multiple charges, including murder. No idea of motive here, no word on motive. Police say there's no indication anybody else was involved. Maggie Vespa is joining us now from Rockford, Illinois, where the attack happened. And Maggie, I know we saw you at that family. I'll get to that in a second. But first, this is a random, it appears, random act of violence, unimaginable, that's drawing some comparisons to a scene out of something like Grand Theft Auto here.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how one neighbor described it, as you know, Hallie, to the local paper. And you can really see why when you start to piece together how exactly this happened. We have a full screen laying out the 5, count them 5 locations where this kind of terror unfolded yesterday in Rockford. It started at what police now say was a friend's house of Christian Soto. You see him there, the 22-year-old who's now been charged in this case, facing 13 counts, including first-degree murder and home invasion. And we talked about a motive, and normally we have kind of a more, I guess I'll say, concrete motive in cases like these. But investigators did give something of an explanation at a press conference today, saying the first location that Soto was at, it was actually the home of a friend of his who he told investigators gave him marijuana that he believes was laced with something, and that, he said, made him paranoid. And he said that's what kicked off this spree of attacks, first on his friend and his friend's mom. And then from there, the authorities say he kind of targeted people at random, including a letter carrier who was on his route. And also, they say, breaking into one home at one point where teenage girls were watching a movie and beating them with a bat. 15-year-old Jenna Newcomb among the girls in that house. She's the youngest victim in this case. So really, Hallie, you know, as we talk about the families that we've been talking to, we talk about the investigators and what they're piecing together, we're getting more of an explanation as to why this started, why this may have unfolded, at least in part. But still, everyone we've spoken to calling this senseless and just having no idea how something like this could happen in their neighborhood, in their community, so on and so forth. And I should point out, Hallie, we're standing in front of the hospital here in Rockford. We still have 3 patients, 3 survivors of the 11 who were attacked, who are recovering inside there, and it could take some time.
And that family you spoke with, Maggie, they told you something really chilling, that the suspect smiled before he attacked them.
Yeah, they said he came in, he was smiling as he came in his back door, in their back door. They said he was covered in blood, and he just said, hey, to the mom. You saw her on the left crying in that soundbite. And then she says he attacked her, stabbing her in the face. She screams, she goes running, crawling away. In comes the son, who's a young adult, and he says that Soto looked at him and said, come here. And then he started attacking him. I think we have time to listen to a little bit more of their soundbite here. Take a listen.
When he looked at me, he just had the world's biggest smile on his face.
He was smiling.
His eyes were black. He had no brown in his eyes. His straight pupil, like he was on drugs or something.
He looked like the devil incarnate.
So again, that family, among the 11 attacked, 3 people there. They say the other hero in that scenario was actually their dog, Brandy, a pit bull who they say when she saw her family being attacked, she bit Soto on the leg as the son kind of fought him off with that syrup bottle. And that's, they say, Hallie, how they were able to survive.
Maggie Vespa live for us there in Rockford. Maggie, thank you for your reporting. We're going to look for more of it tonight on Nightly News with Lester Holt, 6:30, wherever you watch your local NBC News station. Let's take you to weather now, because out east they are getting slammed with some real intense rain. 12 million people under flood watches, making the commute home pretty nasty. Look at this live shot of Boston. There's always traffic, but it's never pleasant when the weather is like this. Meteorologist Angie Lastman has more. There's yet another storm on this one's heels for folks out west.
Exactly right, Hallie. Yeah, and this has been a headache all day long. We've had some really soggy conditions up and down the eastern seaboard. We're going to see some improvements, but we've got to wait a little longer. Places like the mid-Atlantic to the New England area still dealing with rain. The heaviest of it still offshore, but we've got these flood alerts up at this time, and they're going to remain, especially for the northern tier of these flood alerts, into tomorrow morning, because the rain, while it's going to start to taper off in places like New York and Philadelphia as we get closer to 9, 10, 11 p.m., earlier in the morning, we're still going to see that across parts of Boston and points north of that. Then, as the system starts to move even farther away, we get this cold air wrapping around. That means wet snow on the backside of that system as it exits, some additional snow for our friends in the New England area tomorrow. Meanwhile, you mentioned it, we've got a couple of storms that we're watching out west. The first one has been impacting folks across parts of the Pacific Northwest today. We've got a second one on its heels, and that's going to bring the potential for some very heavy rain across parts of California. It's not just a tomorrow problem, it's a Saturday problem. We'll likely see that lasting into Sunday, too, with buckets of rain across the Bay Area tomorrow. We're going to see that impacting folks from that area all the way down into Southern California as we get into Saturday, too. It doesn't look like a crazy storm by any means, but of course, they're fairly vulnerable in that area after a really busy winter, and that means that landslides, mudslides, the potential for flooding is going to be there with those high rainfall rates over the next couple of days. When we're talking about amounts, mountains and foothills, anywhere from 3 to 5 inches, it doesn't take much to see flooding in this area. That's why we're concerned about it, but this is going to last through the rest of the weekend. And of course, some additional snowfall. This is going to be mainly in those higher elevations, places across the Sierra range could likely see over a foot, potentially in some of the highest elevations, up to 2 feet. And then, of course, we're not leaving the Rockies out of that. Notice across portions of the central and northern Rockies, there will be spots that will pick up maybe 1 inch to 6 inches. But notice some of these spots near Park City, Hallie, we're going to see over a foot of snow. It is, of course, not spring just yet out west.
Angie Lastman, thank you very much for that breakdown. Appreciate it. We're going to go back out east now, specifically to New York, with former President Trump, one of many, at the wake of an NYPD officer killed in the line of duty on Monday. Officer Jonathan Diller shot after he approached a car parked illegally. The suspected shooter and the driver of that car now in custody. Mr. Trump's attendance at this wake lines up with some of his rhetoric around crime in the city. He said late last year, violent crime there had hit unimaginable records, in his words. But the reality check, NYPD data shows nearly pretty much all major crime is down compared to this time last year. NBC's Rahema Ellis is outside where that wake happened in New York. Talk us through what we've seen today, Rahema.
Hallie, despite what's been a pouring, drenching rain all day here, people have lined up to go inside of the funeral home behind me to pay the respects to this 3-year veteran of the New York City Police Department. As you point out, 31-year-old Jonathan Diller, this fallen officer, husband and father of a young child, is being remembered here today. Donald Trump came here as well, spent about 30 minutes with the family, and came out and made some remarks about crime, but in a much more subdued manner that his tone seemed to meet the moment. Take a listen.
What happened is such a sad event, such a horrible thing, and it's happening all too often, and we have to stop it. We have to stop it. We have to get back to law and order. We have to do a lot of things differently.
The former president offered no thoughts as to how to stop it. But as you referenced earlier, Hallie, while he has said crime is maybe out of control in New York City, according to the NYPD, major crime in the city is down 2.3% over this time last year. Let me talk a little bit about what's happening here, though, in terms of the crime. The 2 suspects in connection with the death of this officer, they are in custody, have been arraigned, and they're being held without bail. This officer's funeral is scheduled for Saturday. Hallie?
Rahema Ellis live for us there in New York. Thank you. Overseas now, with Pope Francis out in public today, maybe trying to signal some strength ahead of the holiest week in the Catholic religion. You see him here leading Mass this morning in front of hundreds of Roman priests, and later on participating even from his wheelchair in the traditional washing of the feet at a women's prison. Remember, he's 87 years old. He's had a lot of health issues these last few months. He's been dealing with bronchitis, dealing with the flu. with questions only intensifying ahead of this critical week for the Pope and for Catholics around the world. Josh Letterman is joining us now. So, Josh, you look at the Pope, and observers said it seems like he was looking strong. He was able to participate in some of these things that always happen at the start of the Easter weekend here. Talk us through it and the spotlight on the Pope this week.
Well, it's been really up and down for the Pope in the last few months, as you laid out, Hallie. It was not at all clear whether or not he would give that homily today. It was only over the weekend when he, in fact, did not give the homily that was prepared, although he did preside over the service. And it was just 1 month ago today that the Pope was last brought to the hospital, as he's been dealing with all of these respiratory issues. But for now, at least, he did seem to be up to the task. We'll have to see how that plays out over the next few days, as he has a really jam-packed schedule of other Easter events. Really, for the next 3 days, we expect to see him out and about every single day. But it was so interesting today to see how his message, as he begins this holy period of Easter, Hallie, was really not directed so much at Catholic followers, but really at priests. The Pope delivering a message to Catholic priests that he said he wants them to avoid clerical hypocrisy. He wants them to focus on mercy, on having respect and empathy for their followers, as opposed to judging them. And as you know, Hallie, this is a Pope who has faced a lot of criticism, especially from Catholic bishops in the United States, who feel like he's too liberal, too lenient. Here, the Pope, as he gave this unexpected homily, making clear he wants to see more compassion, less judgment from his priests as he heads into this holy Easter holiday. Hallie?
Josh Letterman live for us there overseas tonight. Thank you. Coming up, we are waiting on that news conference in Maryland, including with the governor, preparing for an update on the investigation into that deadly Baltimore bridge collapse. We expect that to happen any minute. We'll bring it to you when it starts. Plus, officials in Japan say at least 2 people have been killed after taking a dietary supplement, or they died after. What we're learning about that investigation. Plus, the controversy over a hot dog in a Subway ad. Right now, some pretty big protests in New York, or at least some protests, period, focused on the war in Gaza, with demonstrators showing up right outside of what's expected to be a big money, multi-presidential fundraiser for President Biden. He's set to appear with 2 of his predecessors at Radio City Music Hall. So that's going to be President Biden, former President Obama, former President Clinton, plus some big superstars, Stephen Colbert, Lizzo, Queen Latifah, Mindy Kaling, Ben Platt, and more. Expected to bring in $25 million. This is a big deal. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is following this from New York. And Gabe, we'll get to the sort of fundraiser of it all in a second. But boy, this is yet again a moment where President Biden is looking to send a message, interrupted by demonstrators upset with his handling of the Israel-Hamas war.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. We've been seeing this over and over again. And you know, Hallie, in the last hour, you asked us to turn the camera around. Well, ask and you shall receive. Some space opened up here, so we are able to turn this camera around. And you can see the crowd that is gathered outside of Radio City Music Hall. This is something that, they came, some gathered at Bryant Park, not too far from here, several hours ago, and now they are right outside of this iconic venue. And Hallie, this is something, as you said, that the Biden campaign is really having to deal with, and it is something that really could pose a challenge for them in several key battlegrounds, as we've been reporting, especially in places like Michigan. These protesters making their voices heard. Still, the campaign wants to focus on what's going on inside this venue in just a short time. As you said, expected to rake in $25 million, a huge haul, potentially, in about 5,000 people. That's what the campaign is hoping for tonight, Hallie.
Real quick, Gabe, do we know, I assume, I'm thinking of Midtown, 30 Rock's right across the street. Presumably, however President Biden, former President Obama, former President Clinton arrive, they're going to see some of this, right? Or at least know that it's out there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, earlier today, you saw President Obama, former President Obama, coming in with President Biden on Air Force One, side by side. It was a striking video, and we know that President Obama has been increasingly taking a more active role in this campaign. But yes, this is quite a visual, Hallie. Look behind me. The NYPD is here, really, outside of Radio City Music Hall. They are prepared for this. You see the journalists gathered here outside. There's quite a perimeter. You see these major city trucks blocking Radio City Music Hall. And this is something that, yes, it's within the earshot of the event. So many people coming here for this fundraiser, as well as presumably the three presidents, they will hear this. Hallie?
Well, let's talk about those three presidents, because we're getting our first look at the three of them together today. They did a podcast, I think, right? The Smartless podcast with the three of them speaking. I think we're showing some of the pictures from the Biden campaign released by them here. And it is a really interesting optic here. You can see, right, in so many ways, the Democratic apparatus now at the start of the general election really trying to rally around President Biden, despite polling showing a real enthusiasm gap among Democrats for him.
Yeah, certainly. And look, these protesters are indicative of that, right? We've traveled to, several battleground states, Michigan, as well as others, that the Biden campaign is trying to focus on what it sees are those core issues, those core Democratic issues, and images like you just saw right there. Former Presidents Clinton, former Presidents Obama, trying to unite the Democratic Party around former President Trump. The Biden campaign feels that everything up until now has been a lot of noise, literally. They think that when we get into the summer, when we get into the heart of this campaign, that the choice will become clear for Democrats despite these shaky poll numbers. That remains to be seen, Hallie.
We will see what happens tonight inside Radio City Music Hall just behind you. Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much for being out there, for showing us what it's like, for bringing us to the scene. Appreciate you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Tampa Bay Rays putting their all-star player, Wander Franco, on administrative leave until June. It's part of an agreement between the league and the Players Association. Remember, Franco is being investigated in the Dominican Republic over an alleged relationship with a minor. He has not been formally charged yet, but he hasn't played since last August when the allegations first came up. Number 2, the Senate set to get impeachment articles against the Homeland Security Secretary April 10th, just a couple weeks away, according to House Speaker Mike Johnson. Then it's up to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to get the trial going. That is something he's agreed to do. Remember, House Republicans narrowly voted to impeach Mayorkas in February over his handling of the border. Number 3, pretty good day for the stock market with an all-time high for the S&P 500 not too long ago. It's ending its first quarter with its best performance in 5 years. A lot of this good news, right? A lot of these gains are on the back of NVIDIA, that superstar tech company. Number 4, take a look. Humongous gator, 8 feet long, being pulled out of a storm drain in Florida. Oof. That he is not too happy about it. Nope, big fight, but crews eventually got him out. They got him into the truck. They got it wrestled into a crate. They say they're going to send the gator off to live at a farm. Careful of those storm drains in Florida. Number 5, the London Underground told a British comedian he had to take down an image of a hot dog on a poster for his stand-up show and replace it with a cucumber. Why? The transit system has a rule against ads for junk food. The comedian says he understands the rule. His concern now is that the poster suggests the cucumbers pair well with ketchup and mustard. You be the judge. I don't know. You guys, you get it all here on this show. Do you know what I mean? You got it covered. If you ever wanted to know what the buzz is, we got you. All right, let's talk about this big ad buy now. Not from a politician, not from a super PAC, but from the company behind one of the most popular apps in the country. Because TikTok is trying to fight back tonight, going up with a $2 million ad buy aimed at blocking that bill headed for the Senate that could ultimately ban TikTok in this country if its Chinese-based owner doesn't spin off the company. Listen.
Think about the 5 million small business owners that rely on TikTok to provide for their families.
The village is always there for the moms on TikTok.
To see all of that disappear would be so sad.
It's going to affect a lot of people's livelihoods.
The ad there, you heard it, right? Focusing on sort of people who use TikTok, talking about small business, et cetera. And it's up in 5 key battleground states, all represented by vulnerable Senate Democrats up for re-election. Brian Schwartz is joining us now. Brian Schwartz is joining us now. Brian, it's great to see you. And what's so interesting, this is so much more out of like the Washington politics playbook here than the playbook you typically cover on CNBC, right? Or the business playbook. Talk about the end game here, the way that TikTok is really trying to use some lobbying leverage to put pressure on these vulnerable Democrats.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it looks like the TikTok really is trying to push out this message of the need
for the app to help small businesses. And when you go through that ad, and I'm sure similar spots that are going to come out shortly, the message is very clear. They want their users to make it clear to the public and possibly lawmakers how important the app is to them in really a pressure campaign, and really an interesting and unique pressure campaign where it's not really directly, lobbyists going to Washington necessarily. It's more turning to the user and saying, listen, make this message clear to Washington that you want the app to remain as is, and see how it all plays out. And really, we don't even know where this bill is going to go in the Senate yet, but that makes this ad campaign even more interesting.
Help us put this into context, right? Because TikTok is worth a gazillion, bajillion dollars or whatever. It's worth a ton of money. So $2 million, that's a lot of money to me. Not so much to TikTok, but this does seem to be a signal of the concern that TikTok has. Is it also a sign of more to come on that front?
Well, TikTok told us that this is, or at least suggested to us, this is really just the beginning, right? That the 2.1 million is not going to be the full number once this is all done. They didn't tell us the exact amount with that, whatever that means. But also, let's keep this in mind. So beyond the TV ads, the company informed us that there are going to be billboards at train stations and bus stations. There's also going to be a digital ad component to this as well. So this is going to be a little bit more widespread, even beyond the television ads. And the impact of that, we'll have to wait and see.
Brian Schwartz from CNBC. Good to see you, friend. Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
When we come back, we are potentially seconds away from that update from Maryland officials on the investigation into that deadly Baltimore bridge collapse. We'll bring it to you live as soon as it happens. Let's get you to Maryland now, where the governor, Wes Moore, is giving an update on the salvage mission and that Baltimore bridge collapse. Let's listen in.
For initial mobilization, operations, and debris recovery efforts. And I can report that as of this afternoon, the Biden-Harris administration has approved that request. We are deeply grateful to President Biden, to Secretary Buttigieg, to our federal delegation, and all of our federal partners. I was thankful to receive a call just about an hour ago from Secretary Buttigieg, and I'm grateful for the way that the administration has continued to lean in and support us. And I recently had a chance to thank them all personally for the continued work. And this evening, I'm also thinking about the first responders and the emergency professionals who have been with us every step of the way. This afternoon, our team was at Camden Yards for opening day, where we met with first responders and their families who joined us for the game. And we spoke with 3 members of the Maryland Transportation Authority Police: Sergeant Paul Pastorek, Corporal Jeremy Herbert, and Officer Gary Kurtz. They saved lives this week, and they are true heroes. We had a chance to speak about not just the lives that they saved by being able to halt traffic just as the bridge was collapsing, but also the unimaginable reality that even after the bridge had collapsed, had that traffic not been stopped in the darkness, cars would have continued to come. So the life-saving work that they did cannot be overstated, and our gratefulness is everlasting. Earlier today, we also visited the R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center. And as you know, one of the survivors of this tragedy was treated there. The folks at Shock Trauma, they are our angels. And I want to thank all of our emergency personnel, to include the United States Coast Guard, the Maryland State Police, the Maryland Transportation Authority and the MDTA Police, Natural Resources Police, Baltimore City Fire, and police departments in Baltimore City, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, and also Baltimore County. And I also want to thank people who have been reaching out from all across the country and all across the world. And this evening, I want to give a few special thank yous. One to our members of the General Assembly in Maryland, who, as we're going to the process of wrapping up another legislative session, have just been consistent partners throughout. And I know that any response that we have is going to be a collective one. But also, I want to give a special thanks to all the governors who have contacted me. I've heard from many chief executives, both past and present. I have heard from governors who are both Democrats and Republicans, governors from big states and little states. They've shared their support, and they shared their counsel. And they've reminded me that in this moment, Maryland is not alone. At this point in the recovery, we are moving at full speed on a number of key priorities, and I've issued 4 directives to this team. The first, we need to continue to focus on recovery because it is our obligation to bring a sense of closure to these families. The second, we need to clear the channel and open vessel traffic to the port because the health of the Maryland economy and the national economy depends on it. Third, we need to take care of all the people who have been affected by this crisis. And that means the families, that means the workers, that means the businesses, that means the first responders, that means everybody. And in the military, I know I was taught something. And one of the things we were taught is you always take care of your people. And we are going to make sure that in this moment, we take care of our people. And fourth, we need to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Going forward, you can expect regular updates on each of these 4 directives, but I want to be clear. This work will not take hours. This work will not take days. This work will not just take weeks. We have a very long road ahead of us. We understand that, and we're prepared. And yesterday morning, our team and members of the federal delegation traveled to the site of the collapse on a Coast Guard cutter. You've had a chance to see the wreckage from far away. Yesterday, we had a chance to see it up close. And when you have a chance to see that wreckage up close, you fully understand the enormity of the challenge. This is an incredibly complex job, and our timeline will be long. And all of us can remember when the container ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal a few years ago, when that happened. It's important to remember that it took 5 weeks to dislodge that ship. Well, if you think about what the dolly is, the dolly is almost as long as the Eiffel Tower. And the dolly has the key bridge on top of it. We're talking 3,000 to 4,000 tons of steel that's sitting on top of that ship. So we've got work to do, but we're moving. So first, on recovery, the best evidence we have at this time suggests that to advance our recovery efforts, we need to do more work in order to clear the channel. As of last night, the Maryland State Police have suspended diving operations due to security concerns, and further engineering analysis is ongoing to determine our next steps to bring closure to the families and set the course for salvage operations. As of this morning, I also received a briefing from the Unified Command on the extraordinary conditions our divers are working under. What our divers are seeing right now is this, is that water is so dark and the debris is so dense that in most instances, our divers cannot see any more than a foot or 2 in front of them. So much of the operation is simply feel. These divers have been methodical, they've been disciplined, they have been courageous, diving in darkness with objects all around them. And so to all of our divers, I want to let them know that we are grateful for their service. Second, on clearing the channel and opening the vessel traffic to the port, I've said it before, I will say it again, and I will keep on saying it. This is not just about Maryland. This is about the nation's economy. The port handles more cars and more farm equipment than any other port in America. And at least 8,000 workers on the docks have jobs that have been directly affected by this collapse. Our economy depends on the Port of Baltimore, and the Port of Baltimore depends on vessel traffic. Yesterday, we were briefed by the commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the Baltimore District, and she laid out her team's efforts with the U.S. Navy to mobilize major resources from around the country at record speed to clear the channel. Under the leadership of Colonel Pinchason, the Army Corps is moving the largest crane in the eastern seaboard to Baltimore to help us. It is estimated that that will arrive later on this evening. And third, taking care of our people. I want to provide two updates. The first, the Maryland Department of Labor now has established a hotline for unemployment insurance for workers affected by the collapse. The number on that hotline is this: 667-930-5989. I will say it one more time: 667-930-5989. I've also appointed an administration liaison to work with the families of the victims in their time of need and letting them know we are going to be here for them and with them. And I want to thank the leaders and organizations that have stepped up in order to help these families as well. Fourth, on rebuilding. We cannot rebuild the bridge until we have cleared the debris. We are working closely with our partners to marshal the funds to move forward on that build so we can be ready when we reach that point of the work. And I want to end by assuring the people of Maryland that this work is moving together at a full clip. And this work is moving forward together. The best minds in the world are here, right now, in Baltimore. They are working on this project in a methodical and a rigorous way, and we are continuing to work with leaders in the community to provide the support to the families and all of those affected. To the people of this state, I say we are going to get through this because we are Maryland tough and we are Baltimore strong. And in this moment, before I hand it off to the U.S. Coast Guard, I want to say we're also here joined by the Maryland State Police, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Maryland Department of Transportation.
You have been listening to that update there from Maryland Governor Wes Moore, highlighting the $60 million in federal money being given for that cleanup to try to get that bridge repaired or at least the debris cleared out after that catastrophic and deadly collapse just about 72 hours ago when a cargo ship that lost power slammed into one of those bridge pillars. I want to bring in Ryan Nobles, who's on the ground in Baltimore, just to let people know. You have been there, you have been covering this, and what's interesting, too, is you heard the governor start to lay out, if not a true timeline, at least a signal, referencing the 5 weeks that it took to get a ship cleared out of the Suez Canal a couple of years ago, sort of making sure to lay the expectation this is going to take a while.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Hallie. I think that Governor Moore, you've really seen over the past couple of days, really make it a priority to inform his constituents about just how much and how lengthy this process will be. Setting expectations is the exact way to describe it. This is not going to be easy, and he does not want to give any sort of false hope that the port is going to be open in a couple of days or that the traffic concerns are going to ease in a couple of weeks, that this is a situation that they're going to be talking about a recovery that takes months and maybe potentially years. And one of the things I thought that he just mentioned that is perhaps the most important is that they have acquired the largest crane on the eastern seaboard to come and help with the removal of the wreckage. And that is significant because, you know, a lot of the engineers that I have spoke to over the past 48 hours have just talked about the logistics of trying to get this stuff cleared from the harbor. There just isn't equipment that is easily accessible that can lift the volume of weight required, and to do so in a safe way, and also do it in a way that would allow them to salvage the important parts of evidence that are necessary to their investigation. So that, I think, is a significant announcement that they have that equipment en route. And, you know, I just think the other thing that's super important is that he has said that the Biden administration has already approved that $60 million in funding. That's just the beginning of that spigot, Hallie. They're going to need a lot more before this is all said and done.
Ryan Nobles live for us at the base of what used to be, of course, the Key Bridge there in Baltimore. Ryan, thank you very much. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day. And because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our teams around the world have done it for you. Here's a look at what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of Japan, a pharmaceutical company says at least 2 people are dead and more than 100 others are in the hospital after taking these dietary supplements. They're obviously now recalled. There was some kind of unknown ingredient in them. The company says people died from kidney disease. Local officials are inspecting all the factories now in Japan for this company. Out of Canada, 4 of the biggest school boards in Ontario say they're suing TikTok along with Meta and Snapchat, alleging they're really disrupting the way students learn. The lawsuit says apps like Facebook and Insta rewire the way that these kids think. No official comment from Meta yet. In a statement, TikTok tells us it's got a bunch of features meant to support teenagers' well-being. The spokesperson from Snapchat says the company feels good about the role it plays in helping friends stay connected. Out of the UK, King Charles stressing the importance of friendship in a time of need. His first public comments since Kate Middleton's cancer announcement. The King's message also comes ahead of an Easter service on Sunday, where he's making his first really significant public appearance as he announced his own cancer diagnosis last month. So listen, it's opening day. Did you take off work? Did you go to a game? Are you watching a game? Big story, though, is kind of the same as it's been all offseason, and that's a guy named Shohei Ohtani. I know you've heard of him, making his first appearance as a Dodger at Dodger Stadium in a game that just wrapped up. Ohtani got a hit, a walk, scored a run in the Dodgers' win over the Cardinals. And listen, Major League Baseball, you got to think, is really hoping that this season will take the focus off the investigation into that gambling scandal, as Ohtani's accusing his former interpreter, his friend, of stealing millions of dollars from him to settle gambling debts. The commissioner saying today he's hoping MLB's investigation will be quick. For fans all over the country, it is about the game on the field. Morgan Chesky knows that. He is joining us from the home of the World Series champion Texas Rangers, where it is standing room only. I assume that is why you're standing, Morgan. And what's so interesting here, this gambling whole scandal that's erupted in the last week that we've covered is casting a shadow over a day that the MLB really hoped to be good vibes only.
Yeah, good vibes all around, Hallie. And I guess some folks would argue that that shadow really only hangs over the Dodgers right now, because for the defending World Series champs, it is just a great time to be here at Globe Life Field in Arlington. Fans are just a very short time away from seeing that world champion banner being unfurled from the roof here. And it's funny, they actually kept the roof closed, even though it is a gorgeous day here in Texas, because they didn't want any wind to disrupt that beautiful moment when this franchise can celebrate their very first championship that they were ever able to bring home. I had a chance to speak with their manager, who told me that he's won 4 World Series now. His favorite one, the next one, and he's telling his team just to savor this moment as much as possible. Of course, unfortunately, there were 4 teams that didn't have a chance to open up the season today, that being the Braves, the Brewers, the Mets, as well as one other team whose name escapes me, but I feel for their fans because rain delayed those games until March 29th. However, for everybody else, it was pure baseball. And important to note here, Hallie, that the game is evolving a little bit, and it's interesting because the fans tell me that the new rules are not taking away from the game whatsoever.
We'll talk about those new rules because this is year 2 for the pitch clock. I was at a spring training game a couple weeks ago, and it's interesting to see. It does feel like it keeps the game moving, but it does also feel like people have settled into that by now. Less controversy this season.
Right. A year ago, people thought it was the worst thing in the world to have the pitcher on the clock. Now they say that, hey, a 4.5-hour or 4-hour game, much better. 2.5, 3 hours now. They've tweaked it even further this year, Hallie, and if someone's on base, pitchers don't have 20 seconds to pitch, they have 18 seconds. I know 2 seconds to pitch may not sound like a lot, but they're pulling out that extra space in the game, trying to compress it. Last year, of course, we also had the addition of larger bases to hopefully increase the number of stolen bases, and then they've cut down the number of visits to the mound this year from 5 to 4, all in an effort to hopefully not drag things out. And it was interesting because fans are excited to, of course, see their team, but plenty of Cubs fans making the trek from Chicago as
That's
well.
Cool.
So, you know, the rules, right, yeah, absolutely. People are well represented here in Arlington today. New rules or not, everyone's just excited to have baseball back, really.
I don't get why you can't just stay and watch. Like, you got a good seat. Get a beverage.
We got to I mean, way ahead of you, Hallie. Way ahead of you here.
I don't want to know what's in the cup.
Responsibly.
I didn't ask, just for the record.
Just enjoying life. Yeah.
Morgan
Cheers.
Appreciate you, our resident Rangers fan. Enjoy the game. Have fun. Thank you very much. More coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.